All right. How's everyone doing today? My name is Greg Denton. I'm a senior product manager at Microsoft. I focus on bringing content creation workflows to M&E and gaming industry on the Azure cloud. And today we're going to be talking about OpenCue. I'm joined by a couple other people from our TSC. We have Diego here and Benjamin Dines, both from Sony Pictures Imageworks. And I also wanted to give a quick mention out to Brian Cipriano, the chair of our OpenCue TSC. Unfortunately, he couldn't attend today, but he's been absolutely critical to progressing this project forward. So today we'll just walk through a quick overview of the project, walk through some stats on our community adoption and growth over the past year, cover some highlights around recent improvements to OpenCue, get some production updates from Sony Pictures Imageworks, and then have time for Q&A and discussion. So what is OpenCue? OpenCue is an open source render management system. It's used for controlling large scale production render farms. Really any kind of distributed task processing can be run through OpenCue, but it's primarily designed around visual effects and animation rendering workloads. Jobs are broken down into 3 layers. You have jobs, and they are constructed of multiple layers. Each of those layers then contains multiple frames, and the frames act as the individual processing tasks. On any one of those layers, you can construct complex dependency networks, and they can be used to really define your job and make it so that you can run it in any order you want. Most of the features that you'd be familiar with any other render management system that's out there and being used, like Deadline, other stuff like that. The role of OpenCue is to manage and report on the execution of those tasks. And, particularly at Sony, it's been proven capable of scaling out across multiple shows, different studios and locations. OpenCue was originally developed at Sony Pictures Imageworks, and it's an iteration of their previous Q3 render management system. In 2019, Imageworks decided to open source Q3 as OpenCue, along with help from Google. And later that year is adopted as an incubation project into the ASWF. Last year, it officially graduated to become an adopted ASWF project. So like we talked about, OpenCue is able to be run at both small and large studios, operate entirely on-premise across multiple studio sites, in the cloud, and hybrid environments. Following along with the open sourciness of the project, the entire stack for OpenCue is open source. Its services primarily run on Java with some Python used for front end and APIs, and the database is running in Postgres. And then there's some extensions for being able to report and visualize your usage through Grafana. All right, so in the past year, we've seen some really good growth in the project, as shown by some of our GitHub contribution numbers. We've seen a 20% uptick in the number of code contributors from 10 different organizations. We had 102 merge pull requests into the project. I had an average rate of about 2 per week. And another metric that shows the growth over the past year has actually been coming from the number of bug reports and the variety of bug reports that we're getting. We're starting to see bug reports come from a lot of different users and different studios, and seeing the same kind of trend in the comments of those issues. So another exciting development that took place this year was that now over 50% of the OpenCue code contributors are now outside the original founding contributors. So when OpenCue first came out in 2019, all the contributions were coming from Google and Sony. Since joining the ASWF, we've seen this number gradually grow, and now to the point where more than half the developer contributors are outside of those founding companies. At the same time, the number of contributions from Sony and Google has not slowed. And so it represents a good growth in our contributor and user base and a greater diversity in the types of studios and users we're seeing. So to go along with the community growth, we've made a number of improvements this year. First off, we continue to grow our support for Windows machines running the RQD agent. Specifically, we added support for hybrid environments running multiple OSs on the same farm. This includes being able to have multiple log routes specified by the machine OS, and the ability to set up automatic path conversion in QGUI, allowing monitor tools to be more portable between the OSs. We also improved our GPU support on the render farm by adding GPU Windows support, as well as there was a number of UI implementation improvements and fixes that were made to better specify how your GPU resources are being reported and used. An example of this is being able to show the GPU utilization across a specific allocation of resources. And then one other thing we wanted to call out was we had the honor of being able to present OpenCue this year to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences during their awards investigations for render management systems. The Sony Imageworks teams and the TSC pulled together a great presentation of the capabilities of OpenCue, and it was a real treat to be able to present our work together. So continuing on, I'll hand it over to Diego to walk over some improvements to the scheduler modes.
Well, I'm Diego, the software engineer responsible for OpenCue and Imageworks. And in the last year, we had some improvements to OpenCue regarding the scheduler modes. So originally, the OpenCue scheduler was designed for Imageworks. So a large studio running multiple productions at the same time and with a large render farm. And with that, although it worked well for smaller studios as well, it wasn't optimal. And thanks for contributions from different small studios, we now have 3 different scheduling modes. The first of them is the priority mode that will take into account priorities set to the jobs, be it through the API manually or through the GUI automatically. Or we also have a new scheduler mode, which is the FIFO. So the first jobs that came in will be the first one processed. So for smaller studios, this is the faster approach and simpler to understand. So it's easier for users to understand how the scheduler is dispatching jobs. And we also have the balance mode, which is an heuristic that takes into account different large shows so that smaller shows don't get starved by bigger shows with a larger demand. And all of this is configurable through the config files. And on the deployment time, users can define which is the best way to work on their studio. And now some stats updates from our usage of OpenCue at Imageworks. So over the last year, since the last presentation, OpenCue was used to render 6 productions that got delivered by Imageworks, being them Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange, The Multiverse of Madness, Vivo, Venom, Thor, and Sea Beasts. So all of those movies, our contribution to those movies were completely rendered using OpenCue. And for this, we had a total of over 1,000 users using OpenCue, a total of almost 4 million jobs completed, almost 124 million frames rendered, and a total of 200 million core hours processed, all using OpenCue. And that's it. Thank you. If you guys have any questions, we're ready to answer them.
Yeah, and if there's no specific questions, I can throw out some topics too that I wanted to bring up, like particularly what types of issues people are running into right now with render farm management. There's a lot of remote work that has changed the way we all work. brought cloud in, brought different studio locations. I hear that as a pretty consistent thing that we're still trying to figure out how to best set up the solution for. So curious if this group, feels like that's a main issue at hand, or if we're dealing with other issues as far as just overall scale of render farm and what the distributions of the render farm look like. So, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we're using OpenCue across in a kind of pure cloud environment with two kind of main deployments. And I think the sort of initial challenges we had were figuring out kind of how to lay it out in terms of facilities. Is it a single facility with hosts in multiple regions? Is it multiple facilities but a single or multiple QBots with a single backend database? And we definitely made some mistakes along the way there. So I think that figuring that out and being able to provide some kind of best practice for how to deploy it in a kind of multi-site context would be a great thing to focus on.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that for us is probably interesting is kind of how it gets packaged and deployed, and being able to be more granular about how the different components get deployed. So at the moment, we basically build Python packages for each component, and so we can deploy them separately, which kind of goes a little bit against how the build systems are set up, which makes it then hard for us to contribute anything back because we've kind of gone off in a different direction. So maybe that's another thing that would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good call. As I think with a lot of open source projects, struggling with documentation is a big challenge, trying to make sure that we are able to have those solutions built out. I think that's something we can try to focus on, in the coming year, to update a lot of that information would be a good call. And then the packaging issue. So you're packaging your own Python packages? Is that?
Yeah, so we build our own Python packages and then we publish them up to our own PyPy index. Mm-hmm. And then all of our containers that we then build can then pull those packages down. And it's quite nice being able to treat the different components separately. So if we, need to bug fix something in, I don't know, PyOutline, we just deploy that package again.
Yeah. I guess, Diego, do you want to?
Yeah, that's somehow similar to what we do internally, but we don't use pip for this. We're using SPK, which is a project that is in development and it's going to become open source soon for packaging. But we also have some work on OpenCue on the open source side to package the Python packages into a pip environment so that it's easier to install. That's work that's still ongoing, but it should be coming out soon.
Okay, thanks.
Was there a separate question there?
Graham answered half of my question by the fact of saying that they're using it. And part of my question was, I saw the statistics, of how many frames at Sony, since Sony is kind of internally switched, and was kind of trying to get a broader sense of. You say that there's contributions from smaller studios, trying to get a wider sense of kind of adoption, not in a kind of, hopefully not in a critical manner, just kind of curious if you have knowledge of the spread and kind of size of studios with different adoption levels.
So we don't have much knowledge of the size and the studios that are using it, but we know from the people that are reaching out to us for help, and I know of studios not studios, but actually universities trying to use it at their labs. We know of smaller studios back in Brazil using it to render everything on Google. And we know of larger studios with multiple facilities across the globe. They're also using it, but we don't have and we can't share their names because it's not for us to share. Yeah, we wish we could. We wish we knew we had a list of all the studios, but we don't have that yet.
There's nothing else. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We'll hang around if there's any other questions.